Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's really wonderful to see all of you here. We'll let you slowly trickle in and join us for this webinar and launch event for our new report, Evidence for Democracy, called AI and Democracy, Navigating Trust, Truth, and Technology in Policy Making. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you. If you look in the chat, our communications manager, Ramit, has shared the link to our newest report. So I encourage all of you to take a look, obviously after the webinar, because we have a lot to talk about today, a very important discussion to be had. So I think we're just going to get started slowly as time is of the essence and we have a lot to cover. So thank you all of you for being here. Before we get started officially, I want to acknowledge that the offices of Evidence for Democracy are situated in Ottawa, which are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. So I want to recognize and respect their enduring relationship to this land and tell you that I'm very grateful to be here with all of you today. My name is Felix. I am the interim executive director at Evidence for Democracy. We are a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that champions the integration of scientific evidence in government decision making. It's a real pleasure to be here for this event where we're going to have about an hour of discussion with these four distinguished panelists that are present here today. I want to keep about, 10 minutes at the end of the hour here. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask our panelists directly, there's a Q&A feature here on the Zoom webinar that you can use. And we have also Trevor Potts, our Director of Research and Policy, who is going to be working at answering your questions you may have during the webinar. So feel free to ask your questions. And if you have directly, questions that are addressed directly to our panelists, we're going to keep them towards the end and we can answer them directly. So again, thank you all of you for being here. And I suggest we just get started. So last year, we heard from the government of Canada that they have signed a memorandum of understanding with the company Cohere, a Canadian company, to explore how AI tools can be developed and deployed to support the work of public servants in Canada. When we think about AI, we often think about chatbots like ChatGPT, but it's much broader than that. We have, facial recognition software, predictive analysis tools. Maybe eventually, we're not there yet, but maybe eventually automated decision-making tools that could be used across governments and our society. So there's a lot of opportunities there for evidence-informed decision-making, but there's also a lot of risks associated with these technologies. So this being said, I want to let our four panelists introduce themselves, as they're all experts coming in to this topic with a different perspective. And I want to ask all of you in, very short, maybe one sentence or a few words to explain how do you feel right now about the use of AI in the government? Are you more on the hopeful side? Are you more on the, scared, dubious side? Tell us where you come from at this. And, we'll start, say, with Beatrice.
Hi, happy to be here, and what a good question. I'm Beatrice. I'm the Director of Research and Policy at the Samara Center for Democracy. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to creating a vibrant culture of democratic engagement across Canada. And one of our research pillars is technology and democracy. Um, if I had to choose one word, I think neither hopeful nor worried would capture it. Like Felix said, I think these are such diverse technologies that fall under the rubric of AI. The word that I would say is I'm deeply curious, and I think we need to really interrogate this question deeply, which is why I'm excited to be part of this webinar.
Curious. I love that. Wonderful. Thank you, Beatrice. Maybe Renee, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Renee Sieber. I'm a professor at McGill University, and I research public participation in a variety of technologies, these days artificial intelligence, both as users and talking about citizen participation in the deployment of such technologies. And I would say if I describe how, and I also run AI in Canadian Municipalities Community of Practice, and we're in our sixth year now. Uh, One phrase I would say government should move slower and not break things. And I'm very skeptical of whether AI can support democracy at all, although it can support efficiency, but more on that later.
Absolutely. I love that. I think we're going to have a little bit of a spicy discussion today. Maybe Helen, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Helen Hayes. I'm the Associate Director of Policy at the Center for Media, Technology, and Democracy, which is a research organization housed at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill. I'm also a fellow at the WASC Center for Dialogue and at Mila, where I focus my research on AI chatbots and their impacts on young people and their mental health. I'm really excited for today's conversation. I think we all bring great and different perspectives to AI and the question of it, not just in government, but also in the ways that it impacts our society, our economy, our ways of interacting with each other, and the ways in which it can actually empower or disempower different groups. And so I'm excited to talk about that. My perspective, I think, is more similar to Renee. I am skeptical of AI use in government. I think it can hold promise for efficiency, but right now the deployment is moving faster than accountability. And I think that that gap needs to close.
Thank you, Helen. This is really great. And I guess last but not least, Kimberly.
Hi, everyone. Kimberly Kargas. So I am the Acting Executive Director for Enterprise Data Strategy and AI Strategy at Employment and Social Development Canada. So I love the question. And I would say, based on consultations across the department and hearing from employees, cautiously hopeful. So certainly agree that there are risks with AI and there are also great opportunities, which is why we need those discussions, the discussions what we're having today, to really bring some of that to the surface. So I think folks are engaged and interested, and we're going to have a good discussion today, and hopefully good continuing discussions on this topic. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. And I think this is a great segue, actually, to start off the discussion. And I want to ask a question to all of you. Why are we talking about this issue right now? Why is it important right now? I mentioned that we have this memorandum of understanding with the Cohere company. We've had this 30-day national sprint consultation on the AI strategy. There's a lot of discussion. Why do we talk about this right now? Does this speak to any of you?
Happy to start and jump in. I think we're talking about this because it's a moment of global democratic backsliding and really weakening trust in institutions. And AI is actively, currently, not in the future, but in this moment, playing a role in that. Um, Technological tools that fall under the AI tagline, I think there are many ways that they have the potential to help support stronger trust in public decision making if they're done in very particular, transparent ways. But I think we have to acknowledge that currently these technologies are actively eroding shared understanding and trust and really facilitating the spread of disinformation across our society. And when we have this moment of threats from abroad and like very clear loosening of our democratic norms, we have to be very wary of the technological tools we're using in this moment and how they are, and acknowledge them and be clear-eyed about the effect that they're having.
And I would agree with that. It's moving very, very quickly, right? So public expects transparency and openness. And at the same time, you've got AI and other methods moving along super, super fast. And we're not the only country facing this, right? It's a global phenomenon. So this is a discussion that all of us need to have now. And if we get it wrong, like as someone who works in government, if you get it wrong, you really do erode public trust. Like it is, there's a lot at stake in terms of making sure that you pick the right use cases, learn from them, share those learnings so that you're getting it right. And so that the examples that do go out are examples of where AI can work and that builds trust. Otherwise, I think it really does erode the trust and the faith that the public has in government. And certainly that's not where we want to be.
Yeah, I might jump in on this too. You know, Felix, you started today's call talking about the investment that the federal government is putting into really like this AI innovation economy. And I think to answer your question, maybe step back a little bit, we've seen the federal government interested in continuing that unprecedented level of investment in AI as a way to bolster the economy, to position Canada as like some bastion of AI advancement. And in my view, I think maybe Renee and I will share the baton of always bringing it back to regulation. But because of that heavy investment, we're seeing discussions about the ways in which AI is going to be impacting our service delivery, how it's going to be impacting our job prospects, especially young people, which I know we'll talk about maybe later in my work with youth right now. We're seeing just this immense amount of, I think, skepticism about the ways in which AI can actually positively impact people's lives, regardless of that federal government investment in AI and adoption across sectors. And I think that because we don't really have a governance framework or a regulatory framework to ensure that that adoption is actually done safely and well, and that people have recourse mechanisms when things go wrong, that we're in this moment where we can deepen Canadians' mistrust of the government, mistrust of other public institutions, if it's not actually handled carefully, if this kind of adoption narrative isn't handled well. And so I think our role, especially as academics, as research organizations, is to just keep asking questions about who is benefiting from the rollout of AI technologies, who bears the risk, and actually who has a voice in the decisions about this adoption lens that the government has taken.
To highlight Helen's comment, we are in a global AI arms race, and Canada has largely pinned its hopes on AI as a way to win that arms race, as well as to ensure digital sovereignty and AI security. But that is being done at the expense of thoughtful public engagement in these technologies, in the impacts, in the harms of these technologies, not just the risks, because the risks are often framed as reputational risks. They're not framed as risks to the public.
Mhm.
And one of the unfortunate outcomes of this is to conflate public trust with public engagement. And then what happens with our approaches to public trust is let us attempt to persuade you, to bully you with how good AI is going to be for you, because there is this assumption that if we bully you enough, if we shower you with all the good things it can supposedly do for you, then you will trust it, then you will socially accept it. And it is simply not the case. And we just need the space for this deep public engagement. We also need the space for resistance to AI, because there is a lot of legitimate distrust that will not be overcome with the government merely telling you how good it's going to be for you. This is not Buckley's, right? It's the cough syrup. This is something that is transformative on our society.
It is very transformative. And I may dig a little bit deeper on that, Renee, and maybe a question for you and Beatrice, just to talk a little bit. You mentioned something earlier when we started this webinar today, when it comes to this focus on efficiency and maybe thinking of efficiency in a broader way that does include, good consultation of the Canadian public. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Beatrice?
Yes, I think we have a lot of the value that AI is sort of publicly seen as adding is this idea of efficiency and time saving. And I think we have to reframe the way we think about efficiency in democracy because being efficient in democracy is about building trust. Fundamentally, you have to have public trust in institutions, and you also have to have time for people to have active disagreements with each other, to actively work out together shared understanding and agree, make collective decisions in a way that just it takes time, it takes trust, and these are slow moving processes. But ultimately engaging with them is more efficient because if you do that work, if you build the trust, you create better policy and you create better faith in governmental institutions, and you can do more ultimately more quickly than if you move fast and break things. I think I've seen people sort of trying to reframe that and say move deliberately and repair things. And I think we have to be in the stage of working on that right now. And I think that it's there's multiple organizations, groups of organization, umbrella organizations that have come together calling for better, stronger, more evidence-based consultations on the national AI strategy. Groups of academics, groups of CSOs. There is a deep public desire for this. And I think talking about ways in which we could institutionalize mechanisms for public input on a developing national AI strategy is really important because these technologies are constantly changing and we need to have a responsive public body that gives input on that. I think one final point I'll add is that when we talk about the value of AI for public decision making, those sort of supports, the AI facilitated tools to help public decision making have been around for more than 10 years. And there hasn't been a lot of government interest in using those to help facilitate deliberation. So I think there's a valuable question about why now, why in this moment is suddenly we're seeing that argument brought out. Final provocative point.
Um, I support Beatrice's attempts to reframe efficiency. We are not an efficient country. We are inefficient by spatial extent. We are a huge country. We cannot be fair and equitable to our remote populations if we merely focus on efficiency. So, if we can move the needle and talk more about effectiveness of decision making and not efficiency of decision making, that would be really, really helpful. Moreover, if I never saw another chatbot, I'd be really happy because my work with AI in municipalities is that most of the return on investment that municipalities are seeing have nothing to do with generative AI, but have everything to do with predictive analytics and to some extent with deep learning. Uh, but generative AI just gets them into more trouble, and we don't even talk about liability in these instances either. Who's going to hold the bag when when the generative AI, the chatbot gives you wrong advice, when your data center goes under? Who's holding the bag for that? Municipalities are very vulnerable to litigation. I mean, less so here in Canada than in the US, but we're very vulnerable to litigation. And I don't want to leave this conversation without reinforcing the notion that we need hard law. We can no longer rely on norms or self-regulation. I know that I was a part of taking down Bill C-27. Come after me for that. But we do need responsible, hard law that holds companies accountable and holds public agencies accountable as well. So we don't have another Phoenix, right? We don't need another Phoenix. But we need hard law, both from, ISED and the Treasury Board.
Yeah, I might actually jump in on that too. It's also what Canadians want, right? Like all of the public interest research shows that Canadians are calling for the government to actually regulate AI technologies. And the fact that it hasn't happened, I think, speaks to broader systemic issues, especially related to engagement. I know one of the major critiques of C27, a very legitimate one, was the fact that there was zero consultation with Canadians about what that legislative framework even looked like. And now that we're seeing both an appetite for legislation, we're also seeing, an increasing, like in a project that I'm running, Gen Z AI, an increasing engagement with certain members of the Canadian population needs to get much better. And I think we need to have better consultation broadly. I was skeptical of the sprint, the AI sprint that the government ran earlier. But I think that when folks like us on a call like this call for regulation, it isn't just a call from academics or civil society orgs or research institutions. It's actually a call from Canadians themselves who want to see these mechanisms put in place.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, Kim, but I feel you may have a more nuanced point of view to bring to this discussion. I don't know, from your point of view, working at ESDC, how have you seen this rollout happen over the last years when it comes to, public trust, involving the public in all of these discussions? How do you view this?
So nuanced but scoped, right? So my role at ESDC is for the internal ESDC AI strategy. But a lot of what you are talking about here in terms of engagement applies at that micro level as well. And so I'll give you a good example of what that looks like. So from the regulation point of view, having those guardrails put in place. So at the GC level, you have things like the directive for automated decision making. At a departmental level, that actually filters down to things like a fairness assessment as a service, a human rights assessment, actually having an AI panel, having an ESDC AI register so that you can look across and see what are the ideas that are being put forward, what are the ones that should proceed, what are the ones that are, where are they in the process? So having those pieces in place, as well as from a consultation perspective, was very deliberate. So we haven't finished our AI strategy for ESDC yet. And to the point earlier, it's taking time. And it's taking time for a reason. It's taking time because it was open to the entire organization, but we also deliberately went out to the employee networks. So Black employee networks, Indigenous, accessibility, and had the conversation. And the conversation didn't start with, here's what we're proposing. It started with, how can we best engage you on ESDC's AI strategy? Which then led to, please equip us, give us an AI 101, then come back to us and let's have an informed discussion. So I think that engagement piece, this is a different level of engagement, but it's really important because who are you connecting with? How are you connecting with them? And how are you ensuring that that feedback is brought into the strategy and roadmap process? So I, would agree, like engagement is important and it takes time. And internally, that is something we're paying attention to at ESDC.
Very glad to hear that. And maybe this is a good segue also to Helen. I want to ask you about, this work that you've done with the Gen Z AI kind of project of involving certain, say, taking a closer look at a certain, sector of the population and so on. How does public trust feed into that? Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So over the last 8 months or so, I've been working with Fergus Lindley Moda on a project called Gen Z AI, which is a national consultation with young people aged 17 to 23 on 4 different AI topics. So we go across the country speaking to 100 Canadian youth about age assurance, data privacy, information integrity, and chatbots. all in concert with the idea of AI rollout and impact in young people's lives. One of the reasons why we started doing this project was because personally, as like being a young person and growing up through this like very intense level of digital technological development, I've realized that there hasn't been space for young people in particular to actually engage with the government on questions related to digital governance. And I wanted to basically create that space so that we could have that conversation, especially as we're seeing young people in particular growing increasingly mistrustful of and skeptical of government institutions because they're just not at all involved in decision-making processes. And if they are, they're usually tokenized. It's more of like a consultation rather than actually a deliberative democracy type engagement with young people. And so, part of the kind of outcomes of Gen Z is, yes, a series of policy recommendations that will be made and delivered at the end of April to federal decision makers related to those four topics. We're actually flying out almost half of our participants to Ottawa to directly deliver those recommendations, which is super exciting. But it's also outside of that kind of impact metric, it's also about giving young people a space where they feel like they're being heard and that they can feel open to talk about how they're experiencing AI technologies in their lives, what it means for them to feel like they don't have the same level of agency in employment because of AI rollout, or what it means for them to not have access to certain forms of content online because of their age, or what it means to be mistrustful of the information they're receiving online because of AI deepfakes. And giving them that space to actually engage with each other and with, we have a group of youth fellows who facilitate all of the discussions as part of this process, allows them, I think, to feel empowered and feel like they have agency in this conversation, to not feel tokenized, to feel like maybe there are ways in which I can be included in conversations about AI governance in a way that actually leads me to the decision makers, that actually shows that my experience is just as valuable as someone who has a PhD in computer science who's speaking to the government about this. Like, it's about my personal engagement. And I think that to really answer your question, I think that that does in some way not completely fill that like void of trust that exists with young people, but I think inches toward a more trusting group of people when they feel like their engagement isn't just after the fact. It's actually agenda setting. It's actually giving them space. And we've seen that really, really effectively over the last, 6 to 8 months of running this project.
Hmm.
I would add to that we have not always done a very good job of listening to people in a fulsome way. And by listening to people, that means influencing actual policy. So the extent that the impact can lead to actual changes in policy is what we want to aim for. The
Mhm.
30-day sprint did not do that. We need a much larger conversation, maybe at an agency level as opposed to at a ministerial level. But how can this influence affect Kimberly's agency? How can it affect the CRA? How can it affect IRCC, ISED? We want to see actual impacts, not just a checkbox.
Absolutely. And this is a great way of building trust and ensuring that the decisions that you take are, will have the best outcomes possible when they represent, the interests of the society. Absolutely, absolutely agreed with everything that was said. Thank you for all of your statements. I want to shift the discussion a little bit. We've talked about transparency, we've talked about trust. I want to talk a little bit about bias because that's something that we talk a lot when it comes to AI tools, that there is an inherent bias that these tools have that is very scary because a lot of the times they are very black box and you can't really see what's going on under the hood or why a certain decision was taken. So, opening this up to all of you, how do you feel about the potential bias that these tools have? You know, is it worse than a human? Is it, what can you tell us about this? I guess, Kim, do you want to go ahead?
So just one piece on the bias. I think AI is a tool. Data feeds the tool. And so that piece behind it in terms of really understanding what is the data you have, where are the gaps, is it disaggregated at the appropriate level, is it fit for purpose? Those are all really, really important questions that have to be addressed when you're thinking about the application of AI. Garbage in, garbage out, right? So I would say that from that perspective, and where I sit in a chief data office, very deliberate in terms of hiring folks who do bring that lens. So we have folks who do data ethics work. We have data scientists who've worked with Statistics Canada in the past, who really trying to think through, okay, if we're going to use it for this tool, is that going to work? Is it going to make sense? Where are the gaps? Where are the risks? So just to bring that nuance as well, that it's not just the AI, it really is a fundamental question about the data that is feeding it, where you're getting it, is it reliable? And if it's not right, how are you looking to fix it? So I think that's just an important dimension to bring as well.
Absolutely, you're 100% correct. And this is something that we also, mention in our report ourselves that, being transparent about what data was used for training is key. If you want to make sure that your tools, at least you show your own bias, right, in the way that you chose the data and things like that. So absolutely. Um, Renee, I feel that you may have something to say about this.
I would flip those questions a bit. Kimberly, I would say, what control do you have over the data? Because, well, first of all, not all AI requires data. Reinforcement learning has rules. You could call that data, but it's not data in the way we're thinking about data now. Um, but traditional AI, like 3 years ago, deep learning, you control the data. That doesn't mean the data isn't biased, as we've seen with IRCC. The data can be horrifically biased, but you control the data and therefore you can do things to ameliorate the data. And it's not a black box in the sense that there is AI, there's explainable AI that can at least glass box some of the decisions that are being made in the hidden layers. So there you can figure out why it's coming to decisions that it's coming to. That's really useful. But as we move increasingly into generative AI, whether that's text to text or text to image or video or audio, we don't have control at the base of the algorithm stack. That's a huge problem. There is bias so deeply embedded at the bottom of that algorithm stack that we can't really get rid of that. So, except through a ton of post processing. And I don't know if we want to always post process the chatbots.
Mhm. So I guess I love the nuance that you're bringing, Renee. Some considerations when it comes to the data, but also the architecture and the tools themselves that are used that, can be biased in some capacity. And we have to be careful about that. So absolutely, absolutely. Beatrice, yes.
I just wanted to jump in on that because I think we use the word transparency a lot when we talk about AI, but what does transparency mean exactly? Is that the data? Is that the model architecture? Is it the weight? Is it the code? What exactly are we asking for transparency with? And we need to have, I think, a public understanding of that for us to really hold these tools to understand them and then make sure that the way we implement them is done in an accountable way. One thing I would like to highlight, but I think is um, A hopeful story maybe is that I'm part of the multi-stakeholder forum on open government with the Government of Canada. Their national action plan is out just yesterday. It was published. And one of their commitments is to create a national AI registry of all the different ways in which AI is currently being used by the Government of Canada and the public service, because they have acknowledged that things have been uh, a lot has fallen out of the AIA, that the third parties were having to do the work of trying to understand how it was being implemented. And they had a commitment about what they were going to specifically, make transparent in this register. I think what they included was information on what and how the data is being used, how the model was trained, quality assurance, accountability. But as anything that happens through the National Action Plan on Open Government, they do have to do outside consultation. That's required as part of the process for open government. And so because of that outside consultation, they added in bias identification and mitigation, success metrics and accountability. Those were things that were added in after public consultation. So I think it just goes to show how critical and important it is to bake in this public consultation to any of these processes.
And accountability and hard law, right? Transparency means nothing if you don't have the levers to act upon that transparency.
Or recourse mechanisms when you're harmed, right? If we're talking about bias, like a big conversation about C27 too was the difference in individual versus collective harms. And if we don't have hard law, well, how do people like actually even talk about how they're harmed, and how do they get recourse for that, and how do we even start to have a conversation about the way that that embedded bias has repercussions and consequences on people's lives, on communities, and yeah, that's a legislative mechanism that we lack and that we need.
Absolutely. And if I may shift the discussion a little bit, the way that a lot of people interact with AI nowadays is, through the internet and through social media, where we are bombarded, by a lot of AI generated content. Beatrice, I know you've worked a lot on this front, specifically when it comes to misinformation. This is not exactly the topic of the conversation today, but I think this is an important point to bring to the front still, because this is the way that people are confronted with AI. Can you tell us a little bit about this and, your work on this issue?
Sure, I'm happy to. And I think it's important to connect these conversations, because I think often when we talk about the potential harm of integrating AI into whether it's government processes or just into the lives of Canadians, it's often discussed as like potential future issues that could erupt instead of active ongoing harms that are happening in this moment. So I think it's important to discuss it. So we have a very polluted information ecosystem at the moment, and that pollution is spreading further and faster with generative AI technologies. So at the Samara Center, we've been following trends around generative AI facilitated political disinformation, content targeting Canadians specifically. We've been looking at YouTube since after the federal election in 2025. And we found that this style of content has really it's evolved in the past year to become more convincing and more resistant to YouTube's moderation. And there's this trend of, you may very well be familiar with this faceless political disinformation content around Canadian politics. There's many, many accounts on YouTube that have strongly similar content styles, similar topics and narratives, and they have this generative AI narration with like really simple editing, intersplicing videos, news clipping, that sort of like AI slop content. And the channels frame themselves as news organizations. They have names like Canadian News Now or Canadian Bulletin, and they just platform disinformation about election related, you know, the election was stolen. There's these issues with the election. There's a lot of separatist content, not just about Alberta, but separatist content about Nova Scotia. It's a lot of sort of ludicrous disinformation, but it's really flooding the zone on YouTube, and they're popping up much more quickly than YouTube moderation takes them down. They amass hundreds of thousands of views. And I think that the issue is not that Canadians are going to see this and immediately sort of buy into the disinformation, but it's creating, and this is a larger issue of generative AI technologies across social media platforms, they create such a sense of distrust in what you see, create such an alternative sense of reality between Canadians that it's very difficult to have a shared public conversation about policy, about our communities, about Canada's future, because we are just flooded with this disinformation. And I think the way there's this slop content, but there's also what we've seen is how easy it is to create inauthentic behavior online through this AI technology now, astroturfing. So fake grassroots activism that's sponsored from outside. This is so much easier now with using LLMs. People can automate bots at scale to write and respond in real time like humans, with goals and narratives in mind. So we've had a long-running project called SamBot, where we evaluate abuse directed at candidates running for election in Canada, and we've seen evidence of astroturfing. And I think that one of the major concerns of this inauthentic behavior online is it's not just warping Canadians' ideas of what other Canadians think and feel, but we have elected officials. We have another project where we interview former MPs after they've left office. They tell us that they are online, they are on social media platforms to get a sense of Canadian public opinion. So then you have a situation where people are using LLMs to create inauthentic engagement online that politicians are seeing, thinking that this reflects Canadians' opinion, and then shaping policy based on this misunderstanding of Canadian public opinion. So it's something that we absolutely have to regulate. We have been far too slow to regulate social media platforms, and we are already seeing the active harms based on the slowness that we've moved to regulate these very large online platforms. And we need to incorporate, often, these platforms are also the AI owners who are shaping the access that Canadians have to things like LLM. So we need to regulate. That is, I know that Helen suggested that she and Renee were the voices, but the Samara Centre is very firmly of the position that regulation, design code regulation is critical.
I might also jump in just because one of our Gen Z AI forums was on information integrity, and a lot of what our young participants had identified as core issues of concern align exactly with what you were just saying, Beatrice. They recognize particularly the volume and the sophistication of AI generated content or other misleading content, which in their view overwhelms users and obviously undermines confidence in reliable information. They also, I think, importantly pointed out that algorithmic recommendation systems reinforce information echo chambers, and they contribute to this social and political polarization. If we're going back to the trust question from earlier, that is related to our information ecosystem and the health of it. And then lastly, they also talk specifically to that question of mistrust as it relates to this engagement-driven information environment that, in their view, contributes to declining trust in news media, in the government, and in other public institutions, because we're seeing just this absolute flood of content, a lot of AI-generated content and deepfakes that really leads young people in particular to be skeptical of the information that they're consuming, not just during particular moments of maybe increased need for access to accurate content, like during elections, but wholly, and it's creating a huge problem of mistrust in all of these public institutions that used to be kind of sources of credibility in young people's views.
And without making this even larger, I think that we need to be a lot more comfortable with dissent and discomfort in our society. And maybe AI is our way to open this up because democracy, I mean, it's messy. It's really messy. It can get really ugly. And I think in an increasingly polarized atmosphere in which we will not be able to distinguish the real from the false, we just need to open it up to people feeling more uncomfortable and how we reconcile that discomfort.
Absolutely. And this is part of a broader discussion about, I guess, training people and ensuring they have the skills, the critical thinking skills, the technology literacy skills, right? For understanding all of this information overload, that we're seeing. There's this term that we became aware of during this research project on AI and democracy, which is shadow AI. And shadow AI is this use of AI tools that fall beyond the scope of what you can do from a regulation point of view, right? That people may have a tool on their phone that they look for, and even now Google searches are, AI is integrated there, and you can try to control and regulate as much as possible. But at some point, people need to be equipped with the tools themselves to, navigate this. I want to, pass this on to you, Kimberly, because I know you've been working a lot in this training sphere with the government. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? How do you approach, getting the skills to navigate this mess?
So I'm really glad you actually started with critical thinking, because you have a lot of people who are talking about, data science, data ethics, those are super important, and you need all of those skills in a good data and AI ecosystem. But that critical thinking piece and thinking through, what are the problems we're trying to solve? What is the, does the data make sense? Like just being able to question, ask intelligent questions, dig in, that's important. The other piece around soft skills is also important, by the way, in terms of, okay, you can ask the right questions, you have the technical expertise. Do you have the skills that you need to reach out to your colleagues, to have those discussions, to create partnerships? So those are also important skills. But in my role, my previous role leading data literacy for ESDC, there's a few angles here. One is the foundational piece, right? So what does foundational data literacy look like? So how are you embedding that in some of the, what do we call the mandatory training, right? So what are the kinds of key questions you need to ask yourself when you're using data? How are you a good data steward? What do privacy considerations look like? What do security considerations look like? Like those are the base. There's another layer onto that, which is more tailored. So I'll give an example of a tailored piece. AI boosters. So actually something that we're working through right now, where you partner with a business lead in the organization and you say, okay, let's look at the business that you do day to day. Now let's actually have a series of sessions where we're actually going through how do you use data in AI in that space. So making it very practical. Like it's not a one size fits all. You have a whole suite of products and tools available. The other piece I think that's really important here is understanding that you're not doing it alone, right? ESDC doesn't exist in a bubble. So we work with the Canada School of Public Service. We work with the ESDC College. We work with even Mila, right? So leveraging tools like the AI Compass, for example, and leverage the expertise that comes from our international partners as well. What if they use what works, and learning from that? So I would say when you're thinking about that literacy and training piece, you really need to think not just about one area, but different audiences, different needs, and then have a bit of a toolkit in place. So it is a collaborative piece of work, and you really do need to think through the mix of skills that you need to be building.
Can I pair every AI booster with an AI skeptic who asks the question, should X type of AI be used for this problem?
Or should AI be used at all?
Yes.
Right, like that. So like this is another piece around the critical thinking is, what's the business problem I'm trying to solve? is AI the right tool for that? Is there something else that I should use? What's the right fit? So really, I was really pleased when you started with critical thinking there, because it's an important piece. It doesn't mean those other pieces aren't important. You do need those technical skills. You need folks who are skilled in data governance. You need to build those things, but the critical thinking is foundational.
And could I also make a pitch for supervisors? That supervisors, in an environment in which many people in government, I fear, are doing two jobs because of austerity, they've had to let somebody else go. Then the tension becomes the only way I'm going to get these two jobs done is by relying on generative AI. Can we give a shout out to the supervisors and the directors general who give people the space, employees the space to do the critical thinking so they don't have to rely on these tools to get the job done at the end of the day?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's part of I really love the discussion about whether, do we need these tools or not? There's a big hype, moment that we're living with AI, and sometimes that's not the solution. I remember when I saw, downtown here, a business saying that their elevators were going to be powered by AI. Do we need this? Do we need an AI-powered toothbrush? Maybe that's not, super useful. Maybe silly examples, but nonetheless. Beatrice, I know you wanted to say something about this. Please go ahead.
Well, just that I think this is all to me sort of drawing or speaking to the fact that we need to have better digital media literacy from the get-go. We've been actually very behind other countries, particularly other middle power countries, in investing in digital media literacy and investing more fully in the sort of civic education that helps build those critical thinking skills. And I think going back to what Renee said earlier, helps build a comfort in disagreement, in the sort of democratic disagreement and decision making that is should be a little uncomfortable, but ultimately productive. We don't have a curriculum that allows a lot of opportunity for getting used to that part of the democratic process. And I really think that we're looking at a national AI strategy. I think we need a national digital media literacy strategy, and I think it's very overdue.
Yeah, I might add to that too, that I think that there's certainly a role that media literacy and AI literacy can play in this conversation. But I also think that there's actually 2 points. I think there's an importance in being aware of and confronting how those media literacy programs are being funded and by who. I think in Canada right now, we have a huge issue with big tech companies coming into Canada to fund media literacy programs, which actually doesn't end up fostering critical perspectives. If anything, it might do the opposite. And to go back to the question about the Canadian public, I think that there also could be the risk of framing AI anxiety or AI skepticism as ignorance that needs to be corrected through education, whereas Canadians actually, from public opinion research, are not actually confused about AI. They want governance mechanisms to make sure that the AI that they're using is safe. And so I think, yes, we do need literacy, but we also need to understand the fact that literacy is not actually the only lever that needs to be pulled in this debate. It actually has to be about creating the circumstances and the architecture that allow people to be trusting of AI systems because they know that there's laws that ensure that they're actually being built and deployed and overseen by government in a way that's effective and that will actually help boost their trust in the way that those AI technologies are being introduced across so many areas of their lives.
I love that, Helen. And I want to be respectful of the time. Since we're nearing the hour here, I don't see any outstanding questions from the audience. If there are any for our panelists,
There is one
is there? Just
from
now,
Justin
Justin.
Singer, who may
Yes.
want to ask this live.
See that Trevor is answering the question. Let me just, just as Trevor is answering the question, and if there are other questions from the audience, please keep them going. But I do want to ask kind of a closing and perhaps more hopeful question for all of you. If, you have one encouraging practice or initiative that, from your own work or anything like that, if you'd like to give a shout out to today, whether it's a good policy or institutional reform that you could see, or educational program, what do you want to leave us with today on that end? And this is for all of you.
I mean, I can start. The initiative that I've been mentioning throughout today's panel, Gen Z AI, as I said, wraps up at the end of April, where we're going to be having our youth participants directly present their policy recommendations to federal decision makers in Ottawa. We have a big summary report that's coming out with all of the issue statements and policy recommendations, and that will be out on April 30th. So it will be posted online and circulated, but keep an eye out for that, because I think it'll be a great way to better understand how young people across the country are feeling about AI.
Hard law. A hard law that holds companies and the public sector monetarily accountable. And criminally accountable too, if necessary.
That is certainly part of it. Yeah. So I love the different takes that that you're all bringing here. Beatrice, is there something that you want to highlight?
So I guess that I was thinking about the question as something that I've seen that gives me hope, not necessarily explicitly about regulation of AI, but I think we're seeing right now locally across Canada lots of really exciting democratic innovations that don't get highlighted often. There's a lot of experiments with participatory budgeting happening
Mm.
that crucially are bringing in young people, bringing communities together in new ways, and actually empowering Canadians to participate actively in collective decision making about their communities. So I think when machine learning or generative AI technologies can facilitate experiences like this, when they help bring people together or help them deliberate in some ways, or they help them scale these experiences to bring more people into the feeling of collective decision making, this is where AI can support rebuilding trust. But I think it's focusing on that experience. I actually have a quote because it was so beautiful to me from a participatory budgeting experience in Hamilton. It was described as the room hums with the chatter of a couple of dozen residents who have never done something like this before. The building custodian peeks in with curiosity and is invited to join the discussion. She offers a few ideas and returns to her work. Next week, she comes back with a proposal for a community garden. That's democratic engagement in Canada, and that's what makes
Love
me
that.
happy.
Love that. Love that. And it speaks also to Renee, what you were saying about meaningful engagement of the public, right? Creating actual, you know, something. Yes.
And,
Kim,
and that engagement doesn't just happen at the national level. And that's one mistake that we continue to make around AI, that it often happens at the provincial and the municipal level.
you're absolutely right. Yes. Kim?
So if I were to think about an initiative, I'm not going to repeat things that have been said, but I am hopeful because we do have those registers that are coming into play. So that transparency piece. But what really gives me hope is the kinds of discussions that we have. I'm a parent. I'm a parent who has someone in the Gen Z age group. So when I hear that there's Gen Z AI, these are the kinds of tools that our young people, and maybe even not just young people, but people need to be able to feel empowered to have discussions and to play a role. And so that makes me very hopeful as well.
That is wonderful. So I think on this note, because this was such a positive note to end with, and because we're nearing close to the hour, I think we're going to leave it there for today. So I want to take the time to, thank all of you for being here today, all of our participants for being here, our panelists. It's been a really great and nuanced discussion from everybody. So thank you so much for your participation. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, We are releasing our report, AI and Democracy, today. It is available on our website. It is also, there's a link in the chat here, so I invite all of you to take a look when you have the time. This is a discussion that is important to be had now because next year maybe will be too late. So we need to have this discussion right now. So thank you all of you for participating, for being here. And I hope to see you all again in the future for a discussion like this. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.